Hi, everybody. Welcome to Making the Mark. I'm here with Mark McKern, who is a Vista chair in the Phoenix Valley and also is a senior business strategist working with a ton of leaders across the country. Welcome, Mark.
Paul, thanks for being here. Welcome to
Yeah,
Making the Mark.
yeah, absolutely. Listen, I want to jump into this because you and I were talking offline, and Mark, you're dealing with top leaders not only in the Phoenix Valley but across the country in the work that you're doing. There's a lot of really hot issues that are coming up with all of the leaders that you're working with, and we had talked about supply chain, the talent wars going on, certainly inflation, which is on
Mhm.
everybody's mind, and then the immunization scenario. So let's jump in. What are you finding out there? What are you seeing? Who are you working with?
Yeah. Well, I'm working with a variety of folks from different industries. Here in the Valley. It's a bit construction centric, but working with folks in the financial industry, working with medical professionals, communications, manufacturing, pretty much the full spectrum of organizations you would find in any metropolitan area, and the
Right,
same nationwide.
right.
From folks that put in kitchens and pave roads to those that are doing consulting for geospatial information.
Yeah, a lot of closely held businesses you're working with.
Yeah, they're mostly privately. Well, they're all privately held, and they're
Right,
generally family-owned businesses.
right. So jumping into these issues, supply chain,
Mhm.
obviously hot in the news. What are you seeing with the leaders you're working with, and what are the issues going on and some of the solutions dealing with supply chain? What's happening right now?
Yeah, supply chain is a tough one because it's pretty much universally impacting every business across the country. Really, it's one that very few businesses have control over, but they're using innovative ways of reaching out, non-standard ways of talking to other businesses who they know are managing similar supplies, particularly the bigs who have bought up a lot of the product, and they're working with them. Since in many of these small businesses, the numbers they need are relatively insignificant compared to the bigger companies. So,
But Mark, what's happening with supply chain? When you say, oh, there's a supply chain issue, what exactly is going on? Are they not have stuff to sell, or they're not getting it, or what is the issue with your businesses?
yeah, well, I think it. I mean, you turn on the news every night, we see about it. We see the bottlenecks of imports coming from, particularly from China. Uh, Anything that's coming in on ships, even though it's arrived, we see the backlog of it. So it's everything from supply parts to end items that people are being challenged with. But typically, we're seeing it in the semiconductor side of business, those that are doing manufacturing or rely on those high end electronics for their products. So they're just being, quite honestly, with supply chain, it's almost one of those where it's hard to have control over it because they're using their traditional methods of how their lead and lag times for ordering. But
Right.
really, what they're doing is getting innovative about it and talking to other folks in the industries and other industries who might have those parts. They're looking at redesigns of products that will
Interesting.
take advantage of the parts that they do have, and depending on the industry, that's easy to do or hard to do. I mean, if you're doing something that has to go through some kind of qualification testing, that's more money. So it's increasing costs for sure. And those that are succeeding are being innovative about how they find parts.
Is do the leaders you're working with and you yourself think that the supply chain issue, is it a long-term issue? Is this like, okay, hey, this thing's going to be fixed in 60 days, or is it real long term?
Well, most are thinking long term in terms of getting out in front of it, and
They
that's
are.
those that are looking at product redesigns that are going to different suppliers, different parts. But I would say that not being having my pulse on the supply chain challenges that we're experiencing now. Long haul drivers are really the big part. What's
Right.
happening at our ports out in your area or south in Long Beach and San Diego. Products are there; they're just sitting in warehouses. So I want to believe that our country is innovative and entrepreneurially. We are focused that we're going to figure this out because product is being produced. We're just not getting into folks' hands.
Yeah. So the takeaway in the supply chain issue is not going away anytime soon, and the companies you're seeing are just being real nimble and finding other ways
Mhm.
around it.
Yeah, yeah, that's really what it is.
Yep. What about talent wars? It's another issue we were talking
Yeah.
about is what, again, a hot topic. What do you mean by talent wars, and how would you describe it, and what are companies doing?
Yeah, so there's two components to it. It's a hiring and retention of those you hire, and it's retention of those you currently have. And it's it was predicted. I mean, I think it's gone from a hiring and retention challenge to they're now calling it talent wars because, frankly, we have a limited supply of workers at all levels here in the U.S. I mean, a lot of things driving that. Of course, some of the government incentives to stay home have impacted that. But regardless of what's causing it, the important piece is um, how do you fill the seats in your company to be successful?
Yeah,
First
yeah,
off, how do you find the good people that are attracted to your company? And now it's a big part of that is what you're throwing at them to bring them in your company. And once you have them in the company, what are you doing to keep them there? What are you doing to incentivize um, folks to stay in an organization? So the front end of that is when you bring people in, you got to approach it from a marketing perspective versus an HR perspective. You got to market your business. You got to appeal to the current generation of workers, the Gen Z millennials, or the millennials and Gen Zers, and
yeah.
what motivates them. Your
What
company.
does motivate them?
Well, there is that your company's more than just a business. It's more than just a place where they rest their hat. There's a commitment to making the world a better place. They understand the why behind your business and your product, and that should be communicated from all your recruiting tools you use and your marketing strategy for bringing people in to how you communicate with them through the interview process and the onboarding process. The current workforce is very interested in diversity within the organization, the workforce. They're very interested in what you're doing to make the planet a better place. They're interested in life outside of work and having options, whether that's the virtual and in-place options that you can offer to them. So there's a lot of competing activities that people that are being hired are looking at, and you have to appeal to that this generation of workers.
So when they come on board, and that's great, those issues you hit on, I see that. How do you keep talent at the company then?
Yeah, I mean, the quick answer is culture. I mean, it's easy to say culture. Yeah, we have a poster board on our culture and a poster board on our values. That's
Right.
how we're going to keep people. I mean, we know that if you're not living your culture and if it's not embedded at every level, and that's the key piece. People don't leave companies because they say they have a bad culture. They leave companies because because the manager that they directly report to, and that it's important that the culture is a part of the organization, so that at every level, your managers, your leaders within the organization are living that culture, and they will culture trumps other factors when you think of benefits, pay, when they're weighing decisions to leave the companies. Not always, but
Right.
generally that's going to be what keeps them in the organization.
No, that's a good point because I know a lot of companies, they will flout like a 401k plan and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Those are great, but if your culture sucks, who cares
Right.
how great your 401k plan is? People are going to leave no matter how great a 401k plan is, right? I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
you put culture first, but what are there any examples of what companies are doing around culture to keep people at the company and make for a great company culture? What are they doing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's an important question. They're engaging their employees. They're making them feel like they're valued members of the team. So there's a myriad of things that the higher performing companies are doing. They're providing constant feedback to their employees, so they're in a rhythm of one-to-ones.
Oh, okay.
Communications with leader to lead communications where they're providing feedback and focused on what they can do to support them in doing their jobs. They're providing opportunities for their development with the company. And it starts with onboarding, and often we say onboarding is one of the metrics that's looked at in businesses that says, hey, how were you onboarded and how important that is, that first impression you have. But onboarding has to continue out through the lifespan of your time with an organization. What I mean by that is, what are we doing for your development? When we bring a new employee in, we want to understand where they see themselves now, where they see themselves in 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years down the road. If we understand that in the business, then we can do the next step in that's important to culture, is the leader development of that person, or the career pathing of them. And there are two different things: leader development and training, more top down for employees based on their needs. But career pathing is affording them opportunities, whether that's through education, through additional responsibilities, through being a part of committees and groups for mentorship within the company, to get them to see, like, this company cares about me. They value what I bring. They care about what I say. And they're interested in, and if I have the potential, they're interested in seeing me advance. So that's a big part of culture. Any company that has a leader development mentality about them.
Where does the culture, the strategy around culture typically come from? Is it from the CEO or the owner of the business? Is it HR? I mean, who's driving that process?
Yeah, culture is leadership, straight up. It's the CEO, president, owner, founder, whoever it is that is running the organization. It's embraced by the executive team. But it's like anything, you can't affect change in an organization unless you have buy-in at the top. So the leader has to buy in the culture. The leader can't say, "Hey, it's important that we practice. Integrity is an important part of what we do, and we always got to communicate directly and transparently with our customers." And then they get in front of a board and they lie. The executive team goes, "What's going on here?" If you're not living it, it's not going to be followed. So it starts at the top, but it doesn't. It's got to be nested at every level within the organization. So the lowest level manager knows where their part fits into the whole of the organization. That's kind of the whole relationship. And so they live the culture at the lowest level, and then it manifests its way uphill as well as down.
Well, it's interesting because I heard somebody who's lectures on culture say one time that for a leader, culture isn't about going out to the whole company and soliciting everybody's ideas about what the culture should be.
Mm-hmm.
That's a recipe for disaster. It's the leadership deciding what culture is, and then making sure they get the buy-in and the execution of that with others. Is that a fair way to describe it? Would you say?
Yeah, no, definitely fair. I mean, and it manifests itself in so many ways. It's the attitude of the boss and the people that fall in under the boss on how they show up every day. I mean, it starts as fundamental as that, but it's about how they carry themselves, who they do business with, how they communicate with their people, going back to one-to-ones, that you feel like there's a constant communication with the organization. You do things like all hands meetings where the leader gets in front of the folks and talks about where you are, to include, getting into the financials of the organization, talking about the future, talk about areas that they haven't done well and areas they can improve. So it's that transparency where people say, okay, the people are honest, they're upfront here, they're communicating. I understand the why behind what we're doing, and then you get buy-in. And once you get buy-in, then the people's full potential is reached. They want to work for the company. They're not looking for ways to shirk responsibility and try to get through the day without doing what they know they should do. They feel an obligation and commitment to the business.
Yep, good stuff. Good stuff. Inflation. I want to tick this one off too. Another big hot area.
Yeah.
What's going on with inflation? How are companies dealing with that you're seeing out there on the front lines?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of discussions about this, particularly when it comes to pricing. So, like, I'll often, have a discussion with, how much has gas gone up lately? So when you talk about your pricing, how are you dealing with it? It's one of those things where you got to really look at your customers and your stakeholders and make a decision about how you want to do that and how that's passed on, or where you can address the impacts of inflation. Because it's definitely impacting labor. It's impacting cost of fuel, which impacts everything. Cost of goods. So cost of goods sold is going up in every company because everything from price of wood to what it takes to run your vehicles around. So a lot of different ways of dealing with it. Part of it is looking internally and looking at cost savings. Most of the companies I've worked with, I've encouraged them to go back and look at their recurring costs, whether that's insurance, bonding, IT services, things that they have subcontracted out, to go back and relook those and negotiate them, because
Interesting.
yeah, looking at space, companies that use a lot of space and now have virtual and work options. I have a company that is relocating and taking a hit for breaking of a lease, but seeing like in excess of $1 million in savings over the course of the next 5 years as a part of the move. So that money can be poured back into different things within the company, whether it's R&D, accommodate, dealing with inflation increases to product, or capital investments for the organization. So people are dealing with it in different ways. It's one of those things, I mean, you and I were alive in the 70s, and we remember what inflation was. I mean, 16% car loans, house loans, and it's one of those that's almost in the category of beyond your control. You just got to mitigate it as best you can, and how it impacts your customers. And going to customers is, if you're going to pass on costs to them because of this, communicate that. Everybody's going through the same thing. They know what it's like to go to the grocery store. They know what it's like to get in the gas line right now.
Yeah. And I think in the 70s I was a baby, but you were at the discos. I mean, you're quite a bit older than me, so I think that was the difference.
Disco, you got discos right. Yeah.
Great. Very, very good input on inflation. Very, very interesting. What about the immunization scenario, Mark? The forced immunizations, and workers got to be vaxxed. No comment, right or wrong, on that. Just how are businesses seeing that and dealing with it?
Yeah. Well, they're preparing what they can prepare. So they're doing all their research with what OSHA's putting out. If you go to the OSHA website, you'll find quite a bit of information about draft plans and communication, ways of communicating with your employees about it, what they anticipate happening. So they're leaning forward, but they're also recognizing, and they're going out and polling their employees, anonymously in most cases, which they should, because they're asking about a medical situation. So they're asking their employees about immunization. And
you mean they're asking if they're immunized?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And legally you can do that. That's part of it.
Well, they're doing it anonymously through
anonymously. Okay.
Employee engagement surveys, and so you kind of believe they're fairly accurate.
Right.
I mean, I think in most cases people know within an organization, depending on how big it is, but they're at least going out preparing and seeing what the impact could be. In some cases, particularly some companies that deal with federal government, who actually interact with the federal government. And the federal government is mandated DoD wide. So if you're interacting with DoD, Department of Defense, you're going to have to be vaccinated. So there's some companies that have had to say they've made the call already, and because DoD is mandatory, 100%, no exceptions.
Right.
And so they've given people some runway. They let them know about moving on, and they've looked at other folks to replace them. So there's, that's the reality of some businesses, because it's been mandated, whether it's, the Biden mandate or just, what Austin and DoD did with vaccine. So they're prepping for it. That's really the best thing they can do. And they're communicating with their people about it. And they're getting an understanding of what people are impacted. And so what you're seeing across industries is people are preemptively leaving jobs, and that's feeding into this forecast that 41% of all people, all employees, are looking for movement in 2021 to 2022.
41% of all employees are looking for movement. That's a big shift.
Yeah, and it's there's a lot of factors. COVID was a factor in that people kind of sat and squatted during COVID.
Right.
So now that COVID has said, you can operate virtually at this job, and people are looking at cost of living, where they live. We're seeing that in this migration of people, of virtual job migration, and recruiters now reaching across these lines, knowing that they got these billets that can be filled with people that are virtual. So that's why the 41% comes from the analysis that was done probably about 6 months ago on impact on employment in 2021, 22.
Great insight, Mark. And as we're coming up to the time limit here, I want to say thanks for letting me guest host on your show, Making the Mark. I love it. I know, we got to do more of these, because you've got your thumb on the pulse. You're on the front lines working with leaders. So love your perspective. I want to say, thanks to everybody for being here. And yeah, look forward to doing this again.
All right, Paul, always great to see you. And I think you might have snuck in a few discos back in the day.
I did have some long hair. I had some long hair. That's for sure.
I'm sure you did. So, but yeah, no, pleasure seeing you, and always great having these kinds of discussions.
Yep. See you next time, Mark.
Yeah, be well.